Welcome to the Creating Wealth Show with Jason Hartman. You're about to learn a new slant on investing, some exciting techniques, and fresh new approaches to the world's most historically proven asset class that will enable you to create more wealth and freedom than you ever thought possible. Jason is a genuine self-made multimillionaire who's actually been there and done it. He's a successful investor, lender, developer, and entrepreneur who's owned properties in 11 states, had hundreds of tenants, and been involved in thousands of real estate transactions. This program will help you follow in Jason's footsteps on the road to your financial independence day. You really can do it. And now, here's your host, Jason Hartman, with the complete solution for real estate investors.
Welcome to episode 1459, and we've got part two of our guest from yesterday, Jim Puplava, Financial Sense News Hour, with us. And there is a lot going on in the world. In fact, this episode is probably posting a little bit late. Big shout out to our producer, Josh, for getting this episode out because I just had back-to-back interviews all day long. No time to do the intro portion for today's episode. Bear with us, folks. This is a crazy time, but I had some good interviews today, not the least of which was Consuelo Mack from PBS and formerly Wall Street Journal. She will be back on the show soon. I did a great interview with her today, so we've got that one coming to you probably next week. And boy, when you look at the inflationary pressures created by the stimulus packages, folks, supply-demand shock, cycles, maybe deflation, then inflation, maybe inflation, then deflation, maybe just inflation, maybe who knows? It's to some extent anybody's guess. However, we know for sure that there has never been a time in history or there has never been a place on earth where a government could run the printing press, and that printing press is a metaphor. Maybe it's electronic money creation. There's never been a time when a country, a government, a central bank, whatever you want to call it, these relationships are nuanced, of course, can create currency out of thin air without the value of the currency declining. Remember, the fundamental rule of what makes something valuable. There are two components, according to yours truly. Two components, scarcity and utility. Now, some economists would say scarcity, but I disagree with that. Look at something can be scarce, but not have any utility, all right? And something can have utility, but it could be abundant. And it's not going to be valuable if it's abundant with utility. Look, take, for example, sand. Now, oddly, there is a bit of a sand war going on, but sand is still an abundant item, okay? So sand is abundant and it has utility. There's a lot of uses for sand, right? Not the least of which is concrete, right? So sand has real utility, okay? We need sand. It's a useful item, useful commodity, but it's abundant, so it's pretty cheap compared to diamonds, which have utility that was created largely by marketing. Good job, De Beers. and it has some industrial uses, right? But they also are scarce. So, you got to have both scarcity and utility, okay? And when you look at the size of the stimulus packages, meaning money created out of thin air, compare them to the gross domestic product of various countries based on the COVID crisis, it's absolutely mind-boggling. Are you ready to have your mind boggled? Because I'm about to boggle your mind. Here we go. Okay, I'm just going to select a few of these off of this chart I'm looking at that, by the way, is probably going to end up in my pandemic investing presentation. And that'll be a webinar that you will be invited to soon. So this is a new one, just came out today. Percentage of GDP dedicated to the stimulus in reaction to coronavirus. Okay, let's take Well, let's take Italy, because Italy was sadly largely affected by it. Italy, 5.7% of the entire country's GDP. Only so far as of May 10th. Now, there will be more. We can be sure there will be more. But as of just now, basically, 5.7% of the entire country's GDP has been dedicated to stimulus to try and rescue their economy from the ravages of COVID-19. What about Spain? It's even worse, 7.3%. What about France, the haughty French? Even worse, meaning more stimulus, 9.3%. Well, how about Germany? Sprechen Sie Deutsch? 10.7%. But then what about the country that just bucked all the trend? And I haven't looked at it lately, but they might be paying for it with human lives. Or maybe not. I don't know. Maybe we don't know yet, because there's this concept of herd immunity that is a real thing. And it's a good thing if it happens, but a lot of people got to get sick to have herd immunity. So go back and ask the famous, well, I'm attributing it to him. I don't know if it's from him, but I'm going to attribute it to him anyway. I'm going to call it, look, you know what the Jason Hartman question is, right? The Jason Hartman question is compared to what? Okay, compared to what? That's the Jason Hartman question. Well, I'm going to attribute this one to another guy who was the most influential economist in world history, and I don't like the guy, okay? I think he's a moron, and I think he caused a lot of just terrible, terrible human misery, death, famine, just awful things. But he is arguably the most influential and successful, in quotes, economist in world history. Who is that? That's none other than Karl Marx. Karl Marx, okay, because I don't think any economist has had more influence than Karl Marx, sadly. The country that the Karl Marx question, that's where I was going. Where am I going with this, Jason? It's been a long day, folks. I've done a lot of interviews today. So the Karl Marx question, I'm coining that phrase. The Karl Marx question is, do the needs of the few outweigh the needs of the many? Or another way, do the needs of the many outweigh the needs of the few? Well, Sweden, baby, right there. They have bucked the trend with this whole thing in terms of their public health policy. But you can't deny that they are spending a lot of money to stimulate their economy based on what's happened with coronavirus. 12% of their GDP has been dedicated to this crisis. Wow, that's shocking. But wait, there's more. What about the good old United States of America? Well, the good old US of A, Uncle Sam, and this is only so far, folks. There's going to be a lot more coming. This is like the third inning, maybe, right? We got 9 innings in this game. Is that how many innings you have in baseball? I guess. I don't know. Not much of a spectator sports fan. Karl Marx said religion is the opiate of the masses. Or no, I think that was Joseph Stalin. I got the wrong communist, damn it. Okay. Well, I confuse my commies. He said religion is the opiate of the masses. I don't know. Some would argue that spectator sports is the opiate of the masses. So anyway, I don't really have time to watch them or follow them. But in the old days when we actually got together and went to group events, I really did enjoy going to sporting events. I hope those come back sometime, because there's nothing like being in a stadium or an arena and the roar of the crowd and the excitement of the game. And, it's pretty exciting. Anyway, where was I going with that? Oh, yeah. Well, the U.S., 13% of GDP so far, knock on wood, right? But wait, there's more. And this one is, make sure you have a seatbelt on your chair, because you might fall off your chair with this one. This is staggering. The highest expenditure by any country so far, or at least major country. There might be some smaller one that's spent more. As a percentage of GDP, only so far, and we're only in the third inning. Maybe we're only in the first inning. I don't know. Maybe it's only the first inning. They have spent 21.1% of their entire country's productive capacity. 21.1% of their entire country's production has been spent only on trying to stimulate their economy based on the COVID-19 crisis. 21.1%. Dare to guess what country that is? Do you want to guess? Should I keep you in suspense? Yeah, just for a moment at least. I won't make you wait till the next episode. So, I love this book. I've shared it with you before. And it is an old book. It's out of print. I couldn't find I've maybe purchased 50 copies of this book over the years, and I couldn't find any of my copies. They're probably in a box somewhere. So I bought it again from a thrift bookstore, bought it online, but it's out of print, so you got to buy a used one. And it's called Earl Nightingale's Greatest Discovery. Every word in this book is words of brilliance, absolute brilliance in this book everywhere you look. And I want to just share a couple of things from this book. And then we'll get to our guest here and maybe we'll get to the answer. I'm keeping you in suspense about that 21.1%. They say you gotta keep them in suspense a little bit. Okay, it's coming, don't worry. Okay, so this passage, right, from the book Mankind Evolving, okay? Here it is. And why am I sharing this with you? Well, I'm sharing it with you because this whole book by Earl Nightingale, okay, Earl Nightingale's Greatest Discovery, one of the most awesome books ever written. This book is basically about the concept, which is Earl Nightingale's greatest discovery that he discovered from Napoleon Hill, that he probably discovered from James Allen in As a Man Thinketh. And James Allen probably got it from the good book, the Bible, okay? And the basic concept is we become what we think about. That's the rule of life anywhere you look. We become what we think about. And why do I want to share this with you today? Well, because the world is going through a trying time. And it is very important to control our thoughts. Because like Viktor Frankl said, and his great book is Man's Search for Meaning, he talked about how the last human freedom is how we perceive anything. They can do anything to us, but our last freedom is our ability to choose how to perceive anything. They can tie you up and torture you and take pliers and rip your fingernails out or, hang you by your arms or whatever, right? People have been through all kinds of horrific, barbaric events throughout history. And sadly, this kind of stuff still goes on in many countries. It's absolutely disgusting. But the last human freedom is the ability to think the way you want about any given situation. Doesn't matter what the situation is, you and you alone choose how you perceive it. So how are you perceiving what is going on in the world today? Are you looking around and thinking, boy, this is going on, this crisis is happening, but guess what? My fellow people need something, and I can supply something to them. There's an opportunity there. Is there a crisis or an opportunity? And I'm stuck at home. I'm stuck cooped up at home, and I can't go anywhere. Well, what am I doing with this time? Am I using this time to eat potato chips, lie on the sofa, and become fat and work on heart disease and diabetes? Or am I exercising and doing some jumping jacks and some push-ups? Am I letting my brain turn into mush? Or am I studying and increasing my skills? Am I going online to, all these websites like Skillshare? And by the way, I'm not promoting Skillshare, But they did ask me if they could sponsor my show, so I'll give them a plug. And it's a good website, or any of these other, Udemy or any of these other websites, right, where you can improve your skills, or Code Academy, where you can learn how to do coding. Am I improving my skills or letting my brain and body go to mush? What are we doing here? So here's in Earl Nightingale's book, as he quotes from Mankind Evolving, through his images of the future, we come to know man, who he is and how he wishes to be, what his thoughts are, what he values most highly, what he thinks is worth striving for, and whether he thinks it is attainable. Certain types of men hold certain types of vision, subject to their temper and spirit. Tell me what your vision of the future is, and I will tell you what you are. Wow. That is brilliant. That is brilliant. And those are not the words of Earl Nightingale, just words that he quoted. And then another tiny little passage here. And this is another thing he's quoting. And he says, I slept, and by the way, here, let me just tee this one up a little bit. People ask me many times, Jason, you're done. You've made your money. You don't need to work anymore. Why keep working? And believe me, some days I wonder that myself. But what else are you going to do? And what is really the point of life? What is the meaning of life? Well, I think this answers it pretty well. This short little poem. I slept and dreamt that life was joy. I woke and saw that life was duty. I acted, and behold, duty was joy. Duty was joy. That's a beautiful concept, because that's what we're here for. We are here to provide service and value, and that is the meaning of life. And the answer that I kept you in suspense waiting for. That country, 21.1% of their GDP, only so far, dedicated to stimulus packages based on coronavirus. That is Japan. Japan. Wow. That's absolutely shocking. More than a fifth of its entire GDP has gone to stimulate its economy based on coronavirus. Only. Nothing else. Just that. All right, let's get to our guest, Jim Puplava, part 2 today. And tomorrow, we've got a great 10th episode show coming at you. But here's Jim. Hey, let's talk about fiscal policy for a moment, okay? So we talked about the supply-demand shock, how it initially creates deflation, then it creates inflation. And, we're obviously in the deflationary cycle right now. But, what do you think about the fiscal policy of all of this money creation? I mean, are we going to have an inflationary future, or as I think, a stagflationary future?
I think you're going to see stagflation. And one of the reasons is, as we just previously talked about, if you are killing supply, killing small companies, killing suppliers, then all of a sudden you start coming in with big fiscal spending. We got, as I wrote in my article, The End of Money, fiscal or stimulus one was just the first of many to follow. So we just got a supplemental fiscal stimulus. That's $500 billion. They're working on another fiscal stimulus that's supposed to be by the end of May or June, which would include suspending payroll taxes for employees, employers, and maybe a possible monthly check of $2,000. So that's going to put demand. Okay, that's great, but what about supply? And the other thing that they're going to do is, I'm trying to figure this out, and we're trying to project, because the budget deficit was going to be $1 trillion heading into the government's fiscal year ending this September. That was before the 2.1 or 2.2 trillion. You just added another $500 billion. Then they're talking about stimulus 3, which is going to be $500 billion. But Jason, that's only part of the story. The other part of the story is when you have 26 million people unemployed, and maybe it goes over 30, or who knows what that number is going to end up being, that means those are people that aren't working, which means that they are receiving unemployment benefits, so social spending goes up. That's number one. Number two, they're not paying taxes, so tax revenues go down. So in addition to this additional spending that is coming from this fiscal stimulus, you also have the major drop-off in tax revenues, at the same time the increase in social spending. So we could be, within the next 2 years, we could be at $30 trillion in national debt.
So
and that's why I think eventually they're going to devalue the currency.
Yeah. So the gold bugs would say, Peter Schiff would be out there to buy gold. He's been saying that forever, but Peter Schiff has got a checkered record here. His arguments are good. I like the arguments, but the result never seems to pan out the way he says it. So currency devalues. But the question we've got to ask ourselves, Jim, is compared to what? I mean, a lot of central banks are pumping stimulus into the system. So the dollar index is only a comparison, right?
Here's the issue I see. Everybody's devaluing their currency and they're pumping out money, but the Fed is like on steroids. I mean, we added $1 trillion to the Fed's balance sheet in 2 weeks. We're doing daily what they used to do monthly. And, I've never seen anything like this. And then we're also seeing the Fed move into areas they've never done before. Before it was, in the last crisis, it was treasuries and junk mortgages. Now they're moving into the corporate bond market, buying triple Bs, ETFs. They're moving into the junk bond market. They're going into there. They're going into municipal bond market. So there is going to just be no end to this in terms of what they're doing. And eventually what I think they're going to go to is they're going to try to flatten the yield curve. And there's anybody that subscribes to the Wall Street Journal, I've got a Bloomberg, so it looks different. But if you go to the Wall Street Journal, go to the markets page, and then scroll down and go to bonds, and they have a yield curve where it was a year ago. A year ago, you were looking at 30-year bonds or 10-year bonds at 3%. Today, 30-year bonds are a little over 1%. So they're trying to keep the yield curve steepened, but flatten it, which they've done. I mean, you're talking about almost 200 basis points drop in yield on a 30-year bond. And eventually, Jason, I think they're going to do two things. We've got ZIRP, which is zero interest rate policy. The second thing they're going to go is to NIRP, which is negative interest rate policy. And as crazy as that may sound, several weeks ago, if you went into 3 and 6 month T-bills, they were negative.
Do we have to look at money itself like oil and like self-storing your extra furniture, where you literally have to pay for storage? I mean, it's a strange world,
Hey, I'm kidding. You know what else they're thinking of doing to it? And there's a Fed paper. I'm going to put this in my next article, where if you look at your dollar bill, like your $100 bills, and you see that little metal strip in it, there is going to be a tax on cash. And they'll come up with some cockamamie idea. Well, hey, people are doing this, with the drug trade or some kind of illegal thing, terrorists are using it or something. But they're going to penalize you for cash, because what the government does not want is a deflationary environment where the asset markets collapse, because then debt becomes toxic. So how do you inflate the debt markets? Is you get people out of cash. Now, here's something that's going to scare the hell out of you. We have a little over 14 trillion in cash in the banks. These are, that's what people have in their checking account, savings account, money market funds. We only have a little over 1 trillion in actual bills to pay that. So if everybody wanted to pull their money out at the same time, there's only about 1 trillion to back 14. Then if you look at
1 trillion
FDIC,
backing 14 trillion. Okay.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, and it gets worse. Then you look at FDIC. There's only about $100 billion in the FDIC fund to back 14 trillion in deposits.
Mm-hmm.
So this is an event the Fed can't afford to happen. This happened in the early 30s when the dollar was backed by gold. People used gold as money, and people started going to banks and demanding gold.
Right.
Well, all of a sudden that starts sinking the banks. The banks start going under. And what did Roosevelt do? He declared a bank holiday.
Yeah.
Yeah, confiscated people's gold,
right.
And then we came up with the FDIC.
Yeah.
And I think we're at some point, if we keep going down this direction, that's going to be the end game.
You know, I'm curious, Jim. I have a feeling I know where you'd stand on this, but I've never actually heard you say it, so I'll ask you. What do you think about digital cryptocurrencies, Bitcoin, et cetera?
I'm not a big fan of it because it doesn't have a lot of the characteristics of money. Yeah. And the best example I can give you is Bitcoin going from 1,000 to 18,000 down to 4,000 again.
Right.
Yeah. So can you imagine if you were a car dealer and Bitcoin's at 18,000 and you're going in and buying a Lexus, a Toyota, maybe a Honda, you pay for it in two Bitcoins when it's at 18,000, and a month later it's down to 4,000. What happened to that dealership?
Right. It's a disaster. It's like a Zimbabwe-esque disaster one way, depending on which direction it's going. But the other problem with all of the cryptocurrencies, of the bunch, Bitcoin is the best, I believe. But I don't believe in any of them. I'd like to be wrong about it. But the cryptocurrency that's going to win the day is the one backed by the Fed and the U.S. government. And they're going to have one. And then when they have a digital currency, we are going to lose our spending privacy. Of course, there will be a reason, just like you said. It'll be, terrorists and drug smugglers and stuff are using, we need to eliminate cash, and also the virus spreads on cash bills. So it's time for a digital currency, a digital dollar. And I think that's where it's going.
Oh, I agree with you 100% because they want to get rid of cash.
Right.
And then also they can monitor you, and also just think of the power the government has to turn off access to your cash.
I know. It's no longer a thing if they think you've committed a crime, this civil forfeiture, and, they could just go take your stuff. That's bad enough. But in a world where it's a digital currency, they can just deactivate your currency. It's like instantly demonetized. And, you've seen this happen where they demonetize the larger bill denominations in various currencies. And that's one way to just get more control of the population, because spending privacy is, I believe, a civil right. And that's a scary thing when you don't have spending privacy.
I think eventually you're going to see, I wouldn't be owning $100 bills because I think they're going to go against them.
Mm-hmm. There used to be a $1,000 bill and a $500 bill,
Yeah. And so the $100 bill's next.
Yep. So, and that's when those bills were worth a lot more money than they are today. So, a lot more.
So, I mean,
inflation adjusted.
Yeah, they're going to get rid of cash. They're going to go to negative interest rates, and eventually they're going to go to devaluation. We're in the end game right now. Mm-hmm. And, the best, I'd recommend, if you have a chance, go to our website and read my article, The End of Money, because I show the total debt of the United States and I show GDP growth. And there's a wide margin between those two. So it's taken $6, $7, $8 of debt to get $1 of GDP. And you've got the Fed coming in with treasuries, with mortgages, now with corporate debt, now with municipal debt, now with junk bond debt. I mean, how much of this stuff can go on? They can't afford a deflationary asset spiral, because that's when debt becomes very toxic.
So the thing is, we've never been here before, and nobody knows the answer to that question. It's like the Malthusians, that still exist today, who say that, the earth is overpopulated. But the problem is they have no reference point because we've never been here before. We don't know if 7 billion people is too many people. Maybe the earth can sustain 20 billion or 40 billion people. How do we know how much debt a country can sustain, especially a country with the largest military the world has ever known, to force its reserve currency upon the rest of the world? We just don't know, do we? It's the numbers are crazy, and your chart is crazy. Yeah, that divergence between GDP growth and currency growth, it's absolutely staggering. But we don't have a comparison, do we, Jim?
No, we don't have a comparison. The only comparison we can make is with Japan.
Yeah, I was just going to say that 229% of GDP, right, or something like that.
Yeah, 230%. Yeah. We're not even close to that.
Yeah.
So, we have much further to go.
Yeah.
But that's where we're going to start moving. The transition is going to be when we move from this deflationary cycle we're in now more towards the inflationary cycle, because they're destroying by their policies supply. You're putting all these businesses, small businesses, out of business. So that's only going to leave the big guys that are going to be left. So you're going to have limited supply. At the same time, you're going to be pushing money through the system, which is going to create demand. And one of the things that eventually they're going to have to do is, I think we're going towards 0% interest rates. They are going to drive this yield curve. And once again, if you can, go to the Wall Street Journal if you subscribe, and maybe we'll just put this graph in the next article, but I can show you the yield curve of where it's gone in the last year, where you've got 30-year treasuries falling from 3% all the way down to 1%. And then once they get through that, then we're going to go to negative interest rates. And when we get to negative interest rates, then you're going to have problems with cash. And that, I think, is...
Why do negative interest rates cause a problem with cash?
Well, because if you have money at the bank, they're going to start charging you.
Right. Well, but that's just like oil right now, right? You got to pay to store it. And if you have extra furniture, you've got to pay to store it in a self-storage unit, right? So I want to draw that comparison. Maybe, I know we totally think it's weird. I mean, I think it's weird, but I'm just playing devil's advocate here. Maybe you should have to pay to store your money. I mean, it's a weird idea. I get it, because the idea is that money always has an opportunity cost. And if you're not using it and you store it somewhere, someone should pay you to effectively rent it from you so they can use it. That's an interest rate on your savings account, for example. But, the negative interest rate paradigm flips that on its head.
Well, it's not just that, but it also distorts lending. So you can end up doing what Europe had to do, where the ECB had to basically give free money to banks because basically they had to pay out on their deposits, where it was charging and people are just pulling money. So you just, the Fed creates money, gives it to the banks. Hey, we're not going to charge you for this. We're going to give it to you free. And if you use it to make a loan and your cost of funding is zero, then you can still make the bank semi-function. But it's distorting the whole lending process. And it's also distorting in terms of how you value it. For example, if I'm an investor and I'm Warren Buffett and I'm looking at buying a company. So Warren Buffett is a cash flow guy. Mm-hmm. So he's going to look at what is this company going to produce in terms of cash flow, and I'm going to discount that. Well, what happens if what you discount it is at zero? It distorts all those cash flow calculations in terms of what a company is actually worth.
Yeah, it's just a different paradigm. I don't know. It's very weird. I don't think it will actually work. Who knows? I mean, we're just in such uncharted territory. And just to finish off on maybe one more concept, we talked about Japan. So when the debt to GDP ratio gets absolutely out of whack like Japan, I think ours is around 100% or something like that, right? I can't remember. But Japan's is like 200.
Over 100, but pretty close.
A little over 100. And Japan's at 230%. So they're the highest ratio of any developed country for sure, by a long shot. So what happens? What does that mean to them? Well, Japan has had the loss going into 3 decades, I guess. They have this sort of like anemic economy, but they also have demographic problems and, they just don't have any immigration. And so there are other factors, right? What happens? I mean, what's the result of our debt to GDP getting way out of whack like that? What will happen in the U.S., in a country that has the reserve currency, very different from Japan, in a country that's actually growing in population, different from Japan, which is shrinking?
I think in the end, we're going to have some kind of gold-backed currency or some kind of linkage. In other words, when everybody devalues the currency, including the U.S., when we eventually do that, ECB, if it survives, which I have doubts about, or Japan or China, everybody's doing it. I could see them going to some kind of global currency that's going to have something that is going to have to give it tangible value because people won't trust it.
Mm-hmm. And you think gold's the thing, huh? Not a barbarous relic? As the saying goes.
It's been around. And let's put it this way, take a look at what central banks, if it was a barbarous relic, you wouldn't see central banks owning it.
Well, fair enough. Maybe they're just hedging though, right? Who knows?
Maybe they're just hedging what they're printing.
Yeah, hedging their own printing press. Good stuff. Well, Jim, thanks so much for joining us again. It's always a pleasure to have you on. And please do give out your website. I know you alluded to it before, but just so people have it.
Okay, it's Financial Sense, all one word, and sense is SENSE, like common sense, financialsense.com. And Jason, once again, thanks for having me back.
It's always great to talk to you. Thank you so much for listening. Please be sure to subscribe so that you don't miss any episodes. Be sure to check out the show's specific website and our general website, hartmanmedia.com, for appropriate disclaimers and terms of service. Remember that guest opinions are their own, and if you require specific legal or tax advice or advice in any other specialized area, please consult an appropriate professional. And we also very much appreciate you reviewing the show. Please go to iTunes or Stitcher Radio or whatever platform you're using and write a review for the show. We would very much appreciate that. And be sure to make it official and subscribe so you do not miss any episodes. We look forward to seeing you on the next episode.